He said, there are devices now where they can be half a block away and record everything you say. The older I get, the less fun things I can do pop up. With what you say about the Department of Justice, they're going to throw out every case we have with them.
During the 1990s, two labs, dubbed the Blood Brothers by Wall Street analysts, grew to dominate the industry: Quest Diagnostics and Laboratory Corporation of America, LabCorp. When my wife, Marcia, and I came back into the industry 11 years after we retired, the California laboratory industry had changed. Instead of walking into a level playing field for all labs, what we found was a rigged deck, a broad pattern of corruption, kickbacks, price gouging, and naked profiteering. This made it impossible for honest competitors like our Hunter laboratories to survive. Even worse, I discovered that hundreds of millions of dollars were being stolen from California's Medicaid system. This corruption was anything but a victimless crime. Beyond California's taxpayers, many others were getting harmed, namely California's oldest, sickest, and poorest. What I found was that the laboratory testing market in California, dominated by the Blood Brothers, had devolved largely into profiteering by the greedy at the expense of the needy. These frauds were not accidents. They were core business plans designed and sanctioned at the top. I learned of this as the big wink that goes on every day in American healthcare. If you want to be a big or mid-sized player in the healthcare arena, you quickly find out that you must make a choice: join the fraud team or go home. One of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, Merck, was described by an assistant U.S. attorney at a Taxpayers Against Fraud conference as organized crime masquerading as a drug company. I never imagined I would become a fraud fighter. My closest friends, also successful businessmen, despised anyone who sued corporations, particularly whistleblowers. This held throughout corporate America, which views whistleblowers as subhuman obstacles instead of principled people who stand for integrity and fair business and employment practices. Was I about to become something they despised? After much research and reflection, it appeared to me that the only way to save taxpayers from being ripped off, and in the case of Hunter Laboratories to save the business itself, was to stop the Blood Brothers' frauds. The only way to potentially do that was through a whistleblower or qui tam lawsuit. That led to one of the most consequential questions of my life. Did I really want to file suit against a half dozen of the biggest laboratory companies in California engaging in these practices, two of which were Quest and LabCorp, the biggest labs in the world, and a third company that came equipped with a $6 billion trust fund? Nearly all of us love the biblical story about how a lone shepherd, guided by righteousness and armed with only 5 smooth stones, slayed the largest and best armored professional warrior in the world. We use the story as a metaphor in all sorts of situations in which our little selves must accomplish something that seems impossible. But that story is 4,000 years old. My story is timelier and the scale just as big. The Blood Brothers were, and still are, healthcare Goliaths. At the time, I didn't know how fraud fighters tended to be tarred, feathered, and destroyed by the companies they exposed, or that the odds of success were less than the odds of getting hit by lightning, nor that the average award for a successful whistleblower is only $32,000. The reports we hear of whistleblowers settling for many millions are truly few and far between. I simply believed in my heart that I had to take up this cause. So I did. Blood Money is the story of a fraud perpetrated by 2 Goliaths in the industry that rippled across almost all 50 states, and the fight to expose and bring to bear the culprits.
All right, so we are Front Page Pass, brought to you by Word Journeys, the literary world's hottest new podcast. You guys have just got done watching an audiobook trailer of Blood Money by author Chris Riedel, and who happens to be a guest on today. So we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, he sure is. Chris has, I've worked with Chris on writing Blood Money, and we've been working with him for the past few months since. But it's such a great story because it shows what one person can do to try to make things right when everything is just off. And in this case, he's talking about medical lab fraud.
Exactly.
But it's a fascinating story, and to that point, one of the things we did with his book that I would like to bring out for our writers who are watching is we took an investigative journalism type piece, which he wanted also to be fashioned as somewhat of a memoir. And we turned it in, and we used fiction writing techniques that you use to write memoir in order to make it more of a white-collar thriller, which is how the book actually reads.
And it truly does read that way.
Didn't start out that way, but that's what we made of it. And what we did are certain things like use dialogue. So instead of having interviews with the subject in your book, you have conversations with them. You show their facial expressions. You show how their body language moves. And you talk about little incidental things they might be doing when they're talking to each other. And that feels just like a book. I mean, that just feels like a conversational thing. So you turn passive dialogue into active conversation.
Exactly. It really fleshes it out as well.
Yeah.
From a dialogue standpoint, and just having that whole element in there.
Yeah, and as Chris will tell us a little bit more of when we bring him on the show a little bit later today, the stories behind some of these cases and some of the people, including people who died because of bad medical tests, are absolutely riveting. So it made it really possible to set up the chapters. And one of the things you do when you're writing fiction, of course, is you try to get the chapters to start a little bit differently. You change the cadence and the open for each of the chapters. Otherwise, it gets really boring. So we have chapters that open like slam it bang in your face, some that open thoughtfully, others that open with case studies.
Some somewhat introspective almost.
And throughout all of it, you see Chris trying to navigate this labyrinthine maze called the justice system, and in particular the Department of Justice. But also you get the really human emotion of what it was like for him and his family, what it was like for the people he was working with.
Exactly.
The fact him and his family had to hire a retired Secret Service agent as a security consultant because of the very real danger they were facing because of becoming fraud fighters.
And some of the events that you read in the book, you can't hardly believe that they are real. And even occurred. So.
Yeah, and so when you do that with something that's nonfiction, and you use these kind of fiction writing techniques, we used a lot of foreshadowing. We used echoing.
Exactly.
We used cliffhanger endings.
And gave it a lot of suspenseful tones as well. Yes.
And but all the factors of fiction, when you use them together in a memoir, it just makes the memoir better. Then it feels like we're in the person's life with them, which is the whole point. That's what a good memoir does. You feel like you're living their life with them, or at least that portion of the life. So we did a lot of that with Blood Money, and in our interview with Chris, we're going to be talking to him about how he used some of those techniques specifically as well. So I'm really looking forward not only to him talking about the story of Blood Money, but
some would
also,
chalk this up to
but also the writing process.
Yeah, and some would chalk this up to almost a modern day tale of David and Goliath, you could say, because this really is a story of a man that took on the heroic act of taking on some of these big predatorial companies. So it's really just
this book,
fascinating.
this one of these books is going to have a long shelf life. I mean, it just came out a few months ago in hardcover and paperback, published by Acorn Publishing, and then the audiobook has just dropped. And Chris will talk a little bit more about the audiobook later. But I mean, when people, all of us get medical lab tests, all of us do. And when people realize that, the amount of fraud that's involved, I mean,
it's mind-boggling.
Chris and his attorney partners at last count have won more than $550 million worth of cases. So that's money that's gone into taxpayer coffers. However, this industry, this medical lab industry, defrauds taxpayers to the tune of a couple of $1 billion a year. So it's I mean, I can't wait to talk to him.
Me either.
You know, we've talked to him several times in our capacity.
We both worked with him. So
it's going to be fun listening to him in a full-fledged interview where he just kind of takes the gloves
and
off and talks.
And the content of this book, I mean, it's something that's just timeless, really.
Yeah.
And
it's also a perfect example of how writing is can be it's a very socially responsible part of writing. Where
well said.
This man absolutely is sitting on the head of a pin. In fact, it's almost like being on the head of a pin in front of a firing squad on behalf of the American taxpayer. That's exactly what being a fraud
fighter
analogy, or whistleblower is. But anyways, we'll let Chris tell the rest of the story. But I'm excited.
I am too.
Yeah, and then it's also I wanted to just share with everybody something came in the mail the other day. Yeah, so 6 years ago, Stevie Salas, who was Rod Stewart's lead guitarist and also Mick Jagger's years ago, he went on his first tour with Rod Stewart, and he wrote a book about that year, which is 1988, called When We Were the Boys. And then Stevie and I worked on the book together. It came out in 2014 in paperback in the United States. The thing about Stevie Salas is that he's actually much more famous in Japan and in Europe than he is in the United States.
Quite the fan base.
In fact, last year he and his singer-songwriter partner were the #1 pop rock duo in Japan, which is pretty amazing considering Stevie's 58 years old. That doesn't happen very often when you're over 35.
No, I would say that's really monumental.
Yeah. So anyways, when they went #1 in Japan, our agent Dana Newman got a call from a Japanese publisher saying we want the book, which of course is any writer's dream because we basically got another book contract. We had to do almost nothing. And the other day it arrived. So this is the Japanese version of When We Were the Boys. I would love to read to all of you, but I can't read Japanese.
Unfortunately. We'll work on it.
And then this is the back cover, which is Stevie playing with Rod Stewart in 1988. So it's always a thrill to see your book put out in another language.
Absolutely. That's quite the accomplishment.
Yeah. In my career, I've been really fortunate because this is the 5th foreign language I've had a book published in. But it's really cool.
For it to blow up again after all these years, I mean, that just goes to show.
Yeah, and blow up is exactly what it did. The book was #1 memoir in Japan for the first 4 weeks after it came out, and it's been out about 2 months now. So, but it's always cool to just, I don't care who you are as a writer, I don't care how long or how short amount of time you've been writing. When you go to the mail and you see your book in another language, that's a really neat thing, you know.
It's almost surreal.
Yeah. So. Anyhow, but I just wanted to share that, and then.
So, anyways, let's get on with the main part of our show, an interview, Chris Riedel.
Okay, well, Alexa, earlier in our show today we were talking about using fiction writing characteristics or techniques when writing memoir.
Yes, you elaborated on that.
Yeah, without changing any of the truth, obviously, in the memoir, but using fiction writing techniques because what it just makes it a more interesting read, a more engaging read, and the subjects of the memoir then become characters.
Yeah, and it really helps flesh things out.
Relate to them. So that is exactly what we did with the book Blood Money, which is by Chris Riedel, and Chris and I worked together on this book, and that's exactly what we did. We took his memoir and put some fiction writing characteristics to it and turned it into a really compelling book that's gotten nothing but great reviews since the book came out several months ago.
And not only is it a memoir, it truly reads like a thriller, like a Hollywood style thriller. Honestly, and it's
white collar crime thriller, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and the book the book has just come out in audiobook form. But what's even better and more exciting for us today is we have Chris Riedel with us today. So without further ado, Chris, welcome to our show.
Good morning, and thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us, and I mean, it's really fun personally for me to have you on the show because it's been 2 years now since you and I first came together and discussed the idea of taking this manuscript you had and making it into a full thriller style book. First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and about what prompted you to write Blood Money?
I'm in Silicon Valley, and I've spent my professional career. I founded 5 healthcare companies and served as the chairman and CEO of all of them. And with my last healthcare company, I started it in 2003. It was a clinical laboratory. It's something everybody has to go to and have done from time to time. We do blood tests, urine tests, whatever a doctor would order when you go to see them. And what I was shocked to find is that there was just naked profiteering and illegal activity designed to fleece taxpayers and to prevent legitimate companies from being able to succeed in the marketplace. There were these two giant companies named by Wall Street as the Blood Brothers, Quest and LabCorp. And their practices were so predatory that they drove a lot of companies just out of business. And then a lot of companies, when they would drive them to the brink of financial ruin, they'd buy them for a very cheap price. And I found when we started Hunter Laboratories, the laboratory is named after my youngest son, Hunter, that we really couldn't survive in that environment. And so I was left with three choices. The first was to knowingly violate federal and state law and try and compete with the Blood Brothers. The second was to close down the business, lay off 150 wonderful employees, and just write off most of our life savings. And third, the one I ultimately chose, was to try and stop the frauds and stop taxpayers from being fleeced and level the playing field for honest competitors.
So to jump ahead a little bit from that, so what you've been doing for the last almost 15 years is really going to bat for on behalf of the taxpayer whose taxpayer dollars have been used fraudulently or through billing practices used fraudulently by these companies. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I got into it to try and protect my own business, but then I found there was so much healthcare fraud. It's just everywhere in the healthcare system because it's so hard to detect. So I've done quite a bit of it in companies now unrelated to me. I sold Hunter Heart and Hunter Labs 4 years ago, and since that I'm continuing to investigate companies and pursue them. And usually I get a call from someone saying, Chris, I've known about you for a long time. I've read about you. There's this company I'm involved with or that I'm trying to compete with that's doing the following. What do you think? And that's generally today how I find other companies. But it takes a lot of research and investigation. You have to come forward to the government with material, non-public information. You just can't read about something in the press. You just can't get somebody to say, hey, Chris, this company's doing that. You've got to find emails, letters. You've got to get people willing to actually testify about these activities. And most people they don't want to be anywhere near any potential litigation, particularly if it involves Quest and LabCorp or a big company, because they're going to destroy you. They're going to certainly try.
And I feel like doing something that you did would require a lot of determination, sacrifice, and resilience. So I'm just kind of curious, like from an investigative standpoint, this is kind of what you were talking about. What skills did you have to acquire in order to help build this case up against the Blood Brothers exactly? Like what was that whole process like?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to be a detective. Nothing had prepared me in business to do this kind of investigation. But I had to develop skills where I could interview people and get them comfortable with opening up. I had to try and get people on the telephone who did not know me. And, when you mentioned, I'd like to talk to you about XYZ company, most of them said, no, thanks. I had to develop the skills to be able to get them to trust me and then to open up. I had to learn how to go through the SEC filings for these companies, which are filed under penalty of perjury, and in which they lay out the risks for the company and their financials, and to look at it from year to year to year and see if anything jumps out as having changed. So it's tough. It's not easy.
Yeah,
But
and
I
Doesn't
enjoy
sound it.
yeah.
Doesn't sound like an easy job.
But just to but the fact is you've had some victories. I mean, you've had some defeats, but you've also had some victories. And last time I asked you, I believe you had told me that your actions and your litigation has resulted in the returning of more than $550 million to taxpayer coffers, including the big one 10 years ago in California, where you return your actions led to the return of $241 million. That's a lot of money. Could you? I mean, that's got to give you a great deal of satisfaction on one hand. But one thing that struck me when I've talked to you about this over the past year, especially, is how you still don't feel that you've done enough. And could you elaborate on that? Because to me, going out there and putting your neck on the line time and again and returning $550 million to taxpayers, to me, that sounds like a huge victory.
Well, it is. There's no question about it. It is. But it's a fraction of what the government should have recovered. When you file a whistleblower lawsuit, it goes under seal by a federal judge, and the Department of Justice determines whether they think it has enough merit for them to, quote, intervene, take it over, and prosecute it. In my experience, when an attorney general would work with us and share discovery, we did very well. But that was only on a couple of occasions. But more generally, what the Department of Justice does is, okay, thank you, we don't need you anymore, go away, and we'll take over from here. And when that happened, which was 85, 90% of the time, it didn't go anywhere. We would get small amounts of settlements, but the Department of Justice does not have the mindset that it wants to stop taxpayers from being fleeced. It has the mindset that we want to have a, quote, affordable civil settlement. We're not going to put anybody in jail, no matter how egregious it is. In all of my cases, only one person has been criminally indicted.
And how many could have been?
Oh gosh, probably 20.
Wow.
And this
That's
fellow
substantial.
wasn't even a CEO. He was the marketing guy. So it's like, why this guy?
Whew, yeah.
And here's an example of how frustrating it is. There was a company called Boston Heart Diagnostics, and they were bribing doctors and never billing patients with copay and deductibles. So there was nothing to stop a doctor from ordering these very expensive tests that could go to $3,000 because a patient was never going to see a bill. And by doing that, they ordered indiscriminately on every patient and basically made their money up, from Medicare and insurance companies. And even then, they pay the doctors to order them. So the government spent 4 years investigating Boston Heart, and then even though they had recently prosecuted 4 other companies for exactly the same behavior, Florida, so we got a call and said, well, we're not going to intervene. Well, why not? Well, it was not a unanimous decision. But what that meant, and we were actually delighted, was that we were free to prosecute the case on behalf of the government. So we immediately did the things the government hadn't found time to do. We took some depositions, we sent out a lot of discovery materials, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, we get a call from the Department of Justice saying, well, we just cut a deal with Boston Heart. We're going to settle for $30 million, when they should have. The amount that was stolen was many multiples of that, well into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And the statute calls for 3 penalties of 3 times the amount that was stolen, so that there's a disincentive for fraudsters. But with DOJ, the way they operate, fraud is very profitable. The risk-reward analysis that criminals use says, do it. If, in the unlikely event I get caught, I'll pay 10 or 20 cents on the dollar and go about my merry way.
Wow.
And when the bribing comes into play, these companies pretty much have impunity from, any sort of penalty.
Yeah.
So,
Nobody got fired. Nobody lost, nobody lost their bonus. These frauds were the actual business models of these companies. I mean, they were designed at the top. And it's how these fraudsters grew their companies and made their own, profits and bonuses and salaries. And in researching the book and looking at other big settlements, in just about every case, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, here are these huge companies, and they get caught time and time and time again, signing settlement agreements and consent agreements with the Department of Justice. And every time they don't get fired by CEOs, their compensation goes up. It's just crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's just
so
wrong.
until DOJ determines that it has to not pay, it's going to continue. And the best way to do that is throw some people in jail.
Exactly, yeah. And I feel
And
like
another idea, the last chapter in the book is my suggestions for what the Department of Justice can do to stop white collar fraud cold. And one of them, it's very simple. If the company enters into a settlement agreement, or they're convicted at trial, for the length of time the fraud lingered, which is generally around 7 to 10 years, you recoup from the board of directors and top management all the monies they were paid by that company. And if you did that, then you'd have the board of directors hiring regulatory compliance people reporting to them instead of the company CEO. And I think that would make a huge change, and it wouldn't cost taxpayers anything.
I feel like one way to counter a lot of this too would be somebody in your shoes, a fraud fighter, a potential whistleblower, for example, to possibly take inspiration from your work and what you've done and what you have accomplished, and to start, bringing these cases to them. So that kind of what makes me want to expand a bit on your a particular chapter in your book, the tips for whistleblowers, I believe is what it's called. So if you could kind of expand on that a little bit and explain kind of the gist of that chapter and why you wanted to include it in your book, essentially, just to kind of give tips for people that are needing to unveil that level of corruption.
And what I wrote this chapter because I want whistleblowers to understand the risks to themselves and the likelihood of success, which is less than being hit by lightning. Very rare to have a decision like we had in California that was a home run for the industry and for taxpayers. But understand, if you choose to be a whistleblower, your life will never be the same. When the big companies find out who has brought this lawsuit on behalf of the government, they do everything they can to destroy whistleblowers. Most of them, the majority of them, end up unemployed, blackballed so that they can't get employment, bankrupt, and divorced. It's just awful what these companies are allowed to do. Yeah, there are protections in the law. And in our case, Quest and LabCorp went and to a huge insurance company and said, look, if you'll take Hunter Labs out of network, we'll voluntarily reduce our reimbursement rates by 10%. And they had an almost duopoly in the industry. That was 70% of this insurance company's outpatient laboratory revenue. So of course they said, sure. You lose a major insurance company, that means patients have to pay more when you're not in network. It was a dagger to the heart. And we were just bleeding out from that point forward. And in fact, at the time of the settlement, we were literally 2 weeks away from both professional and personal bankruptcy. We would have lost everything, which is what happens to most whistleblowers. I met one who had a very big settlement, but before it was awarded, he was living under a bridge. Yeah, it's terrible. And I went to the California Assistant Attorney General, who we were working with on this case during the settlement, and I said, please, put as part of the settlement agreement, they have to get us back in this network, which they could have easily done. He says, I'm not going to do that. I go, well, what about the legal protections I'm supposed to have? Oh, you're making enough money. Don't worry about it. That's a crazy mindset.
Yeah.
I wish I could get the opportunity to meet with somebody at the Department of Justice, but they treat whistleblowers very badly in those cases.
That's sadly ironic in that the Justice Department is supposed to be about justice, which is about truth telling.
Yeah, I would say so.
Right. And looking at success, we do all the work. We write the motions, we go through the documents, we make it really easy for the attorneys, the attorney generals who are, they're really busy. They got lots of stuff to do. And here we're offering the best lawyers around to do this work for them for free. You would think they would jump at that.
Yeah.
And that kind of showcases, for whistleblowers, the risk and reward ratio of it, which is kind of like what I was going to kind of prefaces my next question. I was going to ask, honestly, like without giving too much away that's in the book, what was going through your mind at the time when you realized the potential physical dangers that you or your family could possibly be facing when these fraudsters did get wind of you exposing them? And is that something that made you want to fight harder, or did that deter you in any way? Or
it's chilling. My wife, Marcia, did not want me to file this lawsuit at all. She was afraid that there might be some retribution that would affect her children. And so she insisted. Finally, I wore her down after 4 months and said, I just think we have to do this. And so she said, okay, but I want you to hire somebody to come in here and give us guidance on how we can protect ourselves. So we hired an ex-Secret Service agent, and he gave us some very good but general comments. Be observant. Look on your street. See if you see cars that just don't belong. See if you see people loitering around. He said there are devices now where they can be half a block away and record everything you say. And I later
that's
learned
mind-boggling.
from whistleblowers that, in fact, they did have people parked at their house going through their garbage. They were there all day. So, yeah. And
The level of paranoia.
Read every document related to the lawsuit or my personal financials.
Now, in the book, we hit on another very human cost toll of all of this, and that's the patients themselves. You tell a story in the first chapter of the book about Daria and Weizsäcker that is absolutely bone chilling.
Yes.
And that's one thing I want to bring out, because you talk a lot about this in the book, where eyes are focused on the Blood Brothers and others, doing all of this fraudulent behavior to the tunes of millions and billions of dollars. But the human cost, as you alluded to in the book, it is that by taking smaller companies out of business, and it's decreasing the quality of service. And in some cases, it's Darian Weizsäcker being a perfect example, it costs people their lives. Could you speak to how these predatory practices are hurting the quality of the medical tests that we receive?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The big labs are more concerned with the shareholder price than they are with anything else. And so if they can cut a service and will save a quarter of a penny a share in profits, they're going to do it. And I mean, there are examples in the book. This poor woman, she's 30 years old. She had 2 young children, and she had her pap smear was misread by LabCorp. And she ended up dying a very painful death with her 2 young children by her side in the hospital bed. And the jury found that LabCorp was just negligent. And she won an award. And then as I dug a little further, I found out that both LabCorp and Quest allocate 20% of the revenue for pap smears from legal costs, because it happens so frequently. In my entire career running clinical laboratories, we've never had any charge for legal costs or any question about the accuracy of our pap smears or any other test. If you have appropriate quality control in place, you're going to catch things. Not every test comes out perfect. You're going to catch things, but you have to look hard.
Yeah, and to what we had alluded to earlier in the book about using fiction writing techniques, right? His subject matter made it pretty easy, and and it was and the book does read like a white collar thriller because there's cases like this. I mean, they just tear your heart out, and at the same time you're talking about needing a Secret Service former Secret Service agent to consult protection. But there's all sorts of other amazing, at least amazing to me, examples you give about offshore accounts, about people being just threatened to be murdered, and all sorts of other things. I mean, this is really it makes for great reading, but to be in your shoes, it must have been just absolutely harrowing sometimes when you were when you were working with your attorney partners, Neil McCarthy and Justin Berger.
It was, but I just felt in my heart it was the right thing to do, and that the facts were clear, the law was clear, we would win in the end. I later learned we only won because we happened to get a California Assistant Attorney General who worked with us. If that hadn't happened, it would have gone nowhere. I mean, as an example, we wrote the subpoena and we said, give us all of your fee schedules, because we wanted to show how low their fees were compared to what they were charging Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal is entitled to the lowest charge. That's what the lawsuit was about. And these companies were charging Medi-Cal 20 to 40 times what they were offering the same tests to physicians and insurance companies for. So we subpoenaed their fee schedule. And what we got was a computer printout that was absolute gibberish. And had it not been for me, an insider, who knows what the fee schedules look like that go to doctors, that would have probably been the end of it. So, we sent out letters in another subpoena examples of their fee schedules given to doctors. And we said, we demanded we turn them in this format. And then we got what we needed. But without an industry insider helping these government attorneys who know nothing about the laboratory industry, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, and I know in working with you that it's one we can sit here and trumpet your successes, which you've had quite a few in this, and you're doing something that is, I mean, it's one of those things that's so behind the scenes no one would ever know unless you wrote a book about it. But what I also know, and having gotten to know you, that I think is really special, is you're one of those healthcare CEOs that absolutely cares about the customer / patient so much that you made darn sure at Hunter that you all provided the very best medical lab tests that you could. And could you just talk about that part of yourself that just has that level of care for the patient or the client, and also and how much you miss that now, not being able to do it because of what the Blood Brothers did to your company, for instance, or forced you into doing?
It's just a part of me, to be honest, and to look out for people. When you're in healthcare, you're dealing with human lives. One example, very simple example. The Blood Brothers, about 5% of the time, 1 out of 20, the test result never comes back. That's because they're shipping specimens all over the country to laboratories that they've bought. They'll run this kind of test, or they'll run that kind of test. And they have integrated all these computer systems that don't always integrate so well. Or the specimen sat in a refrigerator and just never got tested. 5% of the time. If you have a critical result, that patient could die. At Hunter Labs, we treated a lost specimen like a lost child. It just didn't happen. And in 15 years we ran it, It happened a couple of times, and we would immediately notify the patient, and we'd send somebody to their house to redraw the specimen, and we wouldn't charge them for the test because we made a mistake. That's just the way I am, and the way I think any good laboratory CEO should feel. And most of them do, but they get run out of business.
Yeah. Well, how he operates is exactly how people should. Take note of
absolutely.
it. But I want to ask a little bit about the writing process itself here. So I didn't know if, when you did write this book, did you sit down and have have to sequence out each event as they unfolded? Did you kind of build an outline, or just start writing whatever aspects of the story came to mind, or did you just go about it chronologically? Like, how did you guys go about writing this?
Alexa, I had no training in writing. I was a political science major in college, and from there I went into the healthcare industry. So I didn't know what to do, but I knew that the stories that I went through of this traumatic fraud-fighting journey should be first unbelievable, and people are going to have a hard time accepting that they're true. So I just sat down and, chronologically wrote it out. And when it was done, I sent it. I had somebody send it to some people who review books, before we did anything with it. And what came back was, this is a great investigative journalism piece, but it's not a thriller. And that's when I called Bob.
To put it simply,
and we spent a year rewriting it, which was really a wonderful experience working with you, Bob.
Yeah, and I hope the day comes we get to do another book. That's for sure.
And then when we were
great to
finished,
see the evolution
I gave it to
of it
my
as well.
attorney to review, and he said, "You can't publish this. With what you say about the Department of Justice, they're going to throw out every case we have with them." So we then rewrote it a third time, where we give the facts about what the DOJ did without giving any editorial comment.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that too, if it had to be rewritten at any point, and if there was any setbacks or changes and so forth from like a legal standpoint, if things have been altered throughout or...
Yeah, well, this is one of those books that you must get legally vetted.
Exactly.
And luckily for us, we had Chris's his attorney partners built in to do the vetting.
Because you have to tiptoe around with just standard memoirs.
Right, but
so something like this, I can see how you really would have to.
Right, but the thing is, when a book goes to a publisher, especially a topical nonfiction like this, the publisher's attorneys will vet it. Usually it's a cursory vetting. Yeah. But in this case, we had to go much further than that because, and we'll talk about this before we while we're still talking with Chris, we'll ask you this in a minute. We'll ask Chris in a minute about the still active cases. I mean, this book's written, it's been out for a few months. The new audiobook just came out, everybody. But the fact is, Chris and Justin and Neil are still working on other cases that are active right now. Right. Yeah, but anyways, to answer your question another way, so I got the manuscript from Chris, and we talked several times. I mean, we had weekly meetings to go over things, and I looked right at it and I go, fiction writing time, where you set the scenes, you know exactly when to bring people on stage. You alter your chapters. You alter your chapter open so some might start kind of thoughtfully, some dramatically, some with action. Right. Okay. Which is exactly how a thriller is written. And then, but what was easy for me is every time I read the story, I just went, damn. I mean, my God, this person dying. Are you kidding? Because of a test. And then some of the some of the dramatics around some of the things the choices Chris had to make, but also the heartbreaking. Just I can't even imagine having to sit at the dinner table with my wife, who's my business partner, and look at the very fact that because of these unscrupulous companies, our life savings and our business and everything we've worked for many years is going to go down the drain. That in itself creates a human element that you can't get away from.
Chris's book definitely gets the blood boiling when you just see the level of corruption that is being unveiled. So I feel like that's why it resonated with so many people. I mean, you can get on there and see reviews where people refer to him as a knight in medieval times, essentially. Somebody read that comment.
Right. So what I did is I just restructured it and made it into these scenes. And then, of course, Chris Chris obviously would take it and then just go, okay, dial it back a little bit, Bob, or this works, and that's how we did it. And then we worked in dialogue and so forth. But it was a really thrilling process. And what was really fun is when it came time to rewrite, and Chris started rewriting. It's like you improved so much as a writer in 1 year. It's unbelievable.
Well, you taught me.
Well, no, you just knew you just knew what to do. You knew what to do. I mean, it was great.
Was writing this therapeutic for you, or was it kind of reliving some of these events?
It's very therapeutic.
Was okay.
Yeah, this was my chance to tell my story, and I think I'm hoping somebody with some authority will, either publish go to DOJ and say, come on, guys, sit down with this guy and let's talk about some of his suggestions. They're all simple. And, if they're going to reduce taxpayers being fleeced, we should do that. That's what we're here for. But that hasn't happened yet. But interestingly, Kamala Harris is a very close friend of Neil McCarthy, my attorney. And I'm hoping that at some point Neil will be able to get us to sit down with Kamala.
That would
be nice. And I should mention that Kamala has the honor of having the top cover blurb on this book.
She does, yes.
And it was really interesting because, she was not yet vice president when the book first came out, just late last fall. But it's kind of neat. It's kind of neat little synchronicity that happened.
It really is,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Kind of the timing of it all.
Yeah, yeah. So so going back to what I was saying before, book's out. We hear about all these cases in the book, the wins, the losses, etc. But you still have active cases. So obviously, without divulging any details that you can't divulge, can you tell us briefly just some of the work that you and Neil and Justin are continuing to do on behalf of taxpayers?
Oh, sure. It's the very frauds that we exposed, and one of our biggest successes went to trial. There were these really clever fraudsters who were two sales guys and a laboratory person got together and said, look, let's create a cardiovascular disease panel like the Boston Heart and like we had. We'll pay the doctors a lot of money to order them. And we'll say it's for packaging and handling the specimens. Well, that's actually included in what the doctor is reimbursed for the office visit. So that's double payment. And then they pay them far more than what it actually costs. They'd say, Doc, how much money do you want to order our panels? We'll give you $20 for packaging and handling. If that's not enough, we'll split it with another lab and they'll pay you $20. And they would take it up to $80. And if that's not enough, we'll put you on our speakers bureau and we'll pay you a lot of money whether you speak or not. And then they would never bill patients. And they'd say, so order on all your patients. And they went to trial, and they were in the South, they were in South Carolina, and they didn't believe a Southern jury would convict them. Well, they did. And so it was a $114 million judgment against them, and they all started bankruptcy shortly thereafter. And this was big news, in the press. And so even today, we have a public company where it's out from under seal now, so I can talk about it. It's doing the same thing. It's a public company. How in the world can a public company that has, to justify to its shareholders, they're doing this? It just boggles my mind.
No,
we didn't do anything wrong.
It's pretty infuriating, yeah.
So we're on Front Page Pass talking about Blood Money with Chris Riedel. And Blood Money is published by Acorn Publishing late last fall originally. It's available in hardback and paperback, but now just now the audiobook has dropped, and so the audiobook is also available. And I know, Chris, you had a fun experience with the audiobook process. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Actors can't find work until recently because the
Broadway was shut down. Nobody was making movies. And so we were very fortunate to get a Broadway trained actor as the narrator of the book. And this guy is so good. I mean, I just love listening to him. You know, they know how to pause and inflect. They can speak with a Southern accent, with a New Jersey accent. I think I was just wonderful. So I really have enjoyed working with him, and I love the audiobook.
So your voiceover, so voice, because I've only heard to this point I've only heard the book trailer, but so the voiceover actor, he went with accents for different regions,
Different characters,
Yes.
different people.
Which
With
was
them.
Oh, that's
something-
great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's something I was specifically looking for in the narrative.
Uh-huh.
Bring more life to the, you know, particularly this Southern judge, you know, where we hear lots of you-alls, and
Yeah.
he captured the judge perfectly.
Well, y'all, you're talking to us from our Kentucky studio, Chris.
Yeah, gosh, my voice is probably reminiscent of that judge, I would say. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but
Absolutely.
but yeah, that is really neat, though. It kind of just shows the versatility, and just like you said, just really brings the book to life almost. Kind of puts you there.
So I guess a question: what have you learned about yourself from the experience of being a fraud fighter, and also from writing a book about it?
I'm a pretty unique guy. I mean, anybody that wants to, you know, file a whistleblower lawsuit has to be kind of crazy, because the odds against you are so stacked. But I'm also a very determined guy. And I just, you know, I believed in my heart it was the right thing to do for the industry and for taxpayers. And the only way to potentially save our company. That's why I got involved. But then I found a passion for trying to stop these fraudsters from basically ripping off, you know, taxpayers.
Yeah.
I'd much rather see a company compete on the quality of its services than the amount of the kickbacks or bribes.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask specifically, I mean, for someone out there that has been put in a similar situation as to what you are, I mean, is there any advice or positive advice more so that you would give a potential whistleblower?
Oh, yes. I have a whole chapter on that. There are things you can do to protect yourself. And I think
Yes.
first thing is ask yourself this. Is this fraud so obvious that a 12-year-old can understand it?
Yeah.
And if it's yes, then you go forward. If it's complicated, justice is going to look at it and go, It's got to be a really obvious fraud. The second thing is get all of your documents, all of your evidence out of the company before you do anything, because you're going to need that stuff. You can't go. If you go to the company and say, you know, what we're doing here, I question whether it's legal or not, you're going to get fired immediately.
Oh,
That
wow.
happens
Okay.
over and over and over again, because the companies want to protect the business model that has made them so successful. Then the next step is really important. You will be attacked. So try and leave the company and get another job. But at the same time, a cottage industry has sprung up of litigation funders. And what they do is, if they like your lawsuit, they'll invest anywhere from $1 million to $5 million. And they'll take a percentage of whatever the award is. But that money's non-recourse. It's yours. You know, if it doesn't go anywhere, they're out that money. So go to a couple of those. If they think it's good enough for them to invest millions of dollars into, it's a great indication you've got a great case. And if they're not, you better think about, well, maybe I don't have all the stuff I need.
Yeah, definitely be prepared for it. Well, that's
So-
well said, Chris.
Toughest question we'll ask you today: what do you do for fun?
Well, the older I get, the less fun things I can do pop up. My wife and I love to travel, and you know, we're going to be able to do that again. Actually, beginning in 2 weeks, and you know, we work out and we weight train and enjoy our kids, and you know.
All right. Well, it's been an absolute delight to have you on our show today,
It has.
and And geez, I mean, for me personally, I mean, this, it's been 2 years since we started working together, and to see this book continue to get the reviews it's getting and impact people, and I just can't wait to see how the audiobook does. That's for sure. But anyways, thank you so much for being on with us, Chris. And once again, to everybody, Blood Money is available through bookstores nationwide. It's available on all online booksellers, and also in both hardback and paperback form. And then the audiobook is also now available on audiobook platforms, and you can also buy that off of Amazon. Okay, once again, thank you again to Chris Riedel, and good luck with everything in the future to you.
Thank you, Bob and Alexa. It's been great.
Yes, it has.
I really enjoy both of you.
All right.
Thank you. Same to you.
All right. Wow, that was quite an interview.
I would say so.
He had a lot to say.
Yeah, really compelling. And I mean, it's just kind of amazing to see, like I've said before, just the level of corruption that he exposed throughout his career, and just even hearing it, in the flesh is pretty crazy, honestly.
Yeah, and what I admire about Chris and his attorney partners, Neil and Justin, is they're still going at it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this is like his, I don't know, his fourth career or something. It's actually become more of a career thing.
Yeah, I would say so.
But what I really love about Chris too, that he brought out in this, is that he's fighting for the taxpayer. I mean, this is, and he doesn't have to be doing this.
Yeah, and as you can see, it started out as something that was somewhat personal. I mean, his business was tanking because of this, on behalf of these predatory companies. And then when he realized, how expansive this was and how many people this was affecting, it really became greater than him, so to speak. So.
Well, we've talked with and about Chris Riedel and Blood Money for most of the show. But we'd like to close today's show in our usual way. Our operations manager at Word Journeys, Erin James, has done her thing and prepared the New York Times top 5 list for fiction and nonfiction. So why don't you take away nonfiction? I will
take it away with reading combined print and ebook nonfiction. So Killing the Mob is at number 1 by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Daugard. Number 2 is Yearbook by Seth Rogen, which is new this week. Number 3 is Billie Eilish by Billie Eilish. Number 4 is The Premonition by Michael Lewis. It is 2 weeks on the list. And number 5 is What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. So.
Well, that's an impressive list.
It is a very impressive list.
Bestseller authors.
Yeah, I would say so.
That we've seen before in many ways.
Some pretty big names on there.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And then I'll read the combined print and ebook fiction list. Number 1, this is interesting, is While Justice Sleeps by Stacey Abrams. And yes, that's the same Stacey Abrams who's a very prominent politician and lawyer out of Georgia. She wrote a novel, and it just debuted at number 1. So what a great start for her. Number 2 on the list is Sully by John Grisham. It's wonderful to see a John Grisham book back on the list, because he, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, he was almost a book a year. And then he slowed down a little bit, but he's got another one out, and it's opening at number 2.
He's totally regained traction.
And such a great legal writer, speaking of legal thrillers.
Yeah.
The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave, that's number 3. And then another fixture on the Beach Read Summer Read list, Jennifer Weiner, is out with That Summer by Jennifer Weiner, new this week. It just entered the charts, and Jennifer, like I said, she's got 5 or 6 New York Times bestsellers.
Yeah, she does.
Summer reads. She's a great summer read writer, beach read writer. So I'm really curious as to how much of That Summer is talking about that summer of 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if it's about something else. And then the last one, this will be fun for beach readers and summer readers. People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. So those are your New York Times top 5 ebook, print, combined fiction for this week.
And so I guess that's it for our podcast. We've enjoyed it. I hope you guys stick around, and be sure to follow us on all of our social. Instagram in particular, we tend to post tips and tricks about writing, post our podcast updates on clients we've been working with, and everything else. You can catch us on YouTube and various other platforms as far as listening to the podcast is concerned, Front Page Pass. So
right, and don't forget to take the feeling of this of the interview and our conversation with Chris Riedel away with you today, and get yourself a copy of Blood Money.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
During the 1990s, 2 labs, dubbed the Blood Brothers by Wall Street analysts, grew to dominate the industry: Quest Diagnostics and Laboratory Corporation of America, LabCorp. When my wife, Marcia, and I came back into the industry 11 years after we retired, the California laboratory industry had changed. Instead of walking into a level playing field for all labs, what we found was a rigged deck, a broad pattern of corruption, kickbacks, price gouging, and naked profiteering. This made it impossible for honest competitors like our Hunter laboratories to survive. Even worse, I discovered that hundreds of millions of dollars were being stolen from California's Medicaid system. This corruption was anything but a victimless crime. Beyond California's taxpayers, many others were getting harmed, namely California's oldest, sickest, and poorest. What I found was that the laboratory testing market in California, dominated by the Blood Brothers, had devolved largely into profiteering by the greedy at the expense of the needy. These frauds were not accidents. They were core business plans designed and sanctioned at the top. I learned of this as the big wink that goes on every day in American healthcare. If you want to be a big or mid-sized player in the healthcare arena, you quickly find out that you must make a choice: join the fraud team or go home. One of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, Merck, was described by an assistant U.S. attorney at a Taxpayers Against Fraud conference as organized crime masquerading as a drug company. I never imagined I would become a fraud fighter. My closest friends, also successful businessmen, despised anyone who sued corporations, particularly whistleblowers. This held throughout corporate America, which views whistleblowers as subhuman obstacles instead of principled people who stand for integrity and fair business and employment practices. Was I about to become something they despised? After much research and reflection, it appeared to me that the only way to save taxpayers from being ripped off, and in the case of Hunter Laboratories to save the business itself, was to stop the Blood Brothers' frauds. The only way to potentially do that was through a whistleblower or qui tam lawsuit. That led to one of the most consequential questions of my life. Did I really want to file suit against a half dozen of the biggest laboratory companies in California engaging in these practices, two of which were Quest and LabCorp, the biggest labs in the world, and a third company that came equipped with a $6 billion trust fund? Nearly all of us love the biblical story about how a lone shepherd, guided by righteousness and armed with only 5 smooth stones, slayed the largest and best armored professional warrior in the world. We use the story as a metaphor in all sorts of situations in which our little selves must accomplish something that seems impossible. But that story is 4,000 years old. My story is timelier and the scale just as big. The Blood Brothers were, and still are, healthcare Goliaths. At the time, I didn't know how fraud fighters tended to be tarred, feathered, and destroyed by the companies they exposed, or that the odds of success were less than the odds of getting hit by lightning, nor that the average award for a successful whistleblower is only $32,000. The reports we hear of whistleblowers settling for many millions are truly few and far between. I simply believed in my heart that I had to take up this cause. So I did. Blood Money is the story of a fraud perpetrated by 2 Goliaths in the industry that rippled across almost all 50 states, and the fight to expose and bring to bear the culprits.